The air in the room is thick, heavy with unspoken accusations and the scent of damp wool coats. Rain lashes against the tall windows of the lawyer's office, a relentless, mournful sound that somehow amplifies the tension inside. We sit around a polished mahogany table that feels vast and cold. My brother sits across from me, his face a mask of smug confidence, a slight, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. Beside him, his wife fidgets, occasionally shooting me a glance that's a mixture of pity and thinly veiled contempt. Other scattered family members are present, their faces solemn, perhaps genuinely sad, perhaps merely curious observers to the inevitable drama they all suspect is coming. Mr. Abernathy, the attorney, a man with kind eyes and a tired slump to his shoulders, clears his throat. The sound is startlingly loud in the oppressive silence. My own hands are clasped so tightly in my lap my knuckles ache. There's a knot of dread in my stomach, a familiar companion these last few weeks. But beneath the dread, there's something else. A cold, quiet resolve I didn't know I possessed. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. Life before this room wasn't exactly a fairy tale, but it was stable, predictable. My father was a complex man, a man of routines and quiet affections. He built his business from nothing, a small manufacturing firm that became his life's work. He wasn't outwardly demonstrative, not given to grand pronouncements of love, but he was there, dependable. My brother, Mark, was always the favored son, or, at least, the one who demanded the most attention. Louder, flashier, perpetually needing approval, or money, or both. He glided through life on charm and a convenient disregard for consequences. I was the quieter one, the observer, the one who often cleaned up the messes Mark left behind, both literally and figuratively. I worked in my father's company, starting on the factory floor, moving up slowly, learning the business from the inside out. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt real. Earned. Mark flitted in and out of various ventures, all requiring significant seed money from Dad, none ever truly taking root. Our relationship was a study in contrasts, a perpetual low hum of rivalry and resentment, mostly from his side. I never competed with him. I just tried to live my own life, do good work, earn my father's quiet respect. And I think, in his way, Dad did respect it. He'd watch me, sometimes, when I didn't think he noticed, with a look that was almost approval. Then came the phone call. The sterile voice delivering the news. Dad was gone. A sudden, unexpected heart attack. The ground shifted beneath my feet. Grief hit me like a physical blow, sharp and suffocating. In the blur of those first few days, arranging things, trying to process the unimaginable void left by his absence, Mark was different. He was present, yes, but not grieving in the way I was. There was a new glint in his eye, a calculating air about him that sent a shiver down my spine. He spoke in hushed tones about handling things, about protecting Dad's legacy. It felt less like a brother mourning a father, and more like a businessman circling an asset. The first sign of trouble came subtly. I went to Dad's house, the house I grew up in, needing to just be there, to feel his presence in the familiar rooms. Mark was already there, going through papers in the study. He looked up, startled, then quickly composed himself. "Just getting things organized," he said, too brightly. "Don't worry about anything. I've got it." He didn't offer comfort, didn't ask how I was feeling, just asserted control. Over the next few days, it continued. He'd make pronouncements about funeral arrangements, about sorting Dad's belongings, always positioning himself as the one in charge. He started talking about the business, too. "Of course, I'll be stepping in now," he'd say, as if it were a foregone conclusion, as if the years I'd spent working there meant nothing. I tried to talk to him about it, about my own feelings, about my role at the company. He'd wave a dismissive hand.
"Oh, that.
We'll figure something out. But the big picture, you leave to me." The grief was still raw, but a new emotion began to fester. Unease. A cold, creeping suspicion that Mark saw Dad's death not just as a loss, but as an opportunity. The unease solidified into outright dread when he cornered me at the wake. The room was filled with people, the air thick with forced condolences and the cloying scent of lilies. Mark pulled me aside, into the quiet, dimly lit study. He leaned against the desk, the same desk he'd been rifling through earlier. He lowered his voice, but the casual cruelty in it was unmistakable. "Listen," he said, running a finger along the edge of the desk. "About Dad's estate. And the business." He finally looked at me, that smirk back on his face, bolder this time. "Don't expect to be in the will." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Dad and I had some long talks towards the end. He understood. You're just not equipped to handle it. It's too complex. The business needs a strong hand, someone with vision. Not someone content to just punch a clock." He straightened up, adjusting his tie. "I'll make sure you're taken care of course. A small allowance, maybe." Out of the goodness of my heart, he chuckled softly, a dry, humorless sound. "But the bulk of it? The company? That's mine. It's what Dad wanted." We finalized everything. My blood ran cold. He hadn't just assumed control. He'd actively worked to cut me out. Used Dad's final days, perhaps clouded by illness or grief, to manipulate him. The pain of losing my father was now intertwined with the sickening realization of my brother's betrayal. I wanted to scream, to rage, to shatter the glass display case behind him. But I just stood there, stunned into silence, watching him bask in his perceived victory. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd finally erased me. From that moment on, the world seemed to tilt. Mark's confidence grew, bordering on arrogance. He started making decisions about the company without consulting anyone, least of all me. He'd show up at the office, barking orders, rearranging staff, talking about restructuring. The people who had worked there for years, who were loyal to Dad's way of doing things, looked bewildered, frightened. Mark's narrative spread like wildfire. I was incompetent, lazy, had no understanding of the real challenges facing the business. He painted himself as the savior, the only one capable of stepping into Dad's shoes. He started selling off smaller assets, claiming they were non-core things Dad had built, piece by piece. I tried to object, to reason with him, to appeal to his sense of family, of legacy. He just laughed. "You really don't get it, do you? It's mine now. All of it." My attempts to fight back felt pathetic. I consulted a lawyer, a family friend really, who was hesitant to get involved in a probate battle. He listened sympathetically, but explained how difficult it was to challenge a will, especially one seemingly finalized just before death. Mark had been careful. He'd arranged for Dad to sign documents, had witnesses present, had seemingly done everything by the book. My lawyer's advice was bleak. Unless I had concrete proof of undue influence or incapacity, it would be an uphill, expensive battle with little chance of success. The cost alone was prohibitive. Mark knew this. He had access to Dad's money now, hiring high-powered, expensive attorneys. I felt cornered, trapped. Every path I considered seemed blocked. The thought of losing not just my father, but his life's work, my own career, and my inheritance to my brother's naked greed was soul-crushing. I watched the business I loved, the business I'd helped build, being dismantled piece by someone who understood nothing about it, only its monetary value. The family, or what was left of it, either sided with Mark, believing his lies, or stayed silent, unwilling to risk his wrath, or simply not wanting to be involved. I was alone. Utterly, terrifyingly alone. One night, staring at the ceiling in my empty apartment, the weight of it all felt unbearable. The betrayal, the injustice, the sheer hopelessness. It was a physical ache, centered in my chest. I thought about giving up, letting him have it, walking away from the poisoned legacy, the broken family. But then I thought of Dad. Not the distant figure Mark painted, but the quiet man who taught me how to change a tire, who shared his worn copy of Meditations with me, who watched my progress at the factory with that subtle, almost approval in his eyes. Did he really intend for Mark, of all people, to dismantle everything he'd built? To leave me with nothing? It didn't fit. It didn't feel like him. There was a disconnect between Mark's narrative and the father I knew. A sliver of doubt, cold and sharp, began to pierce the haze of despair. What if Mark wasn't just lying about the will? What if he was lying about everything? About Dad's intentions, about their long talks. What if there was something I was missing? Something hidden beneath the surface of Mark's carefully constructed performance? The thought sparked a tiny flicker of defiance. I wasn't going to roll over. Not yet. I started small, not challenging Mark directly but digging, quietly, going through old family photos, letters, anything that might offer a clue. I visited Dad's house again, slipping in while Mark was away on one of his sudden business trips that felt suspiciously like vacations. I didn't look for a will. I looked for Dad, for clues about his state of mind in the months before he died. I found his journals, filled with his spidery handwriting. Reading them was like hearing his voice again, quiet, thoughtful. He wrote about his health, about his worries for the business, about his disappointments. Reading between the lines, the disappointment wasn't with me. It was directed elsewhere. He wrote about Mark's constant demands for money, his reckless spending, his lack of interest in the actual work of the company. He wrote about feeling pressured, about arguments. There were veiled references to documents Mark wanted him to sign. A chill went down my spine. This wasn't the narrative Mark had been peddling. This was a man worn down, perhaps vulnerable, but not a man willingly handing over his life's work to his spendthrift son. Then I found a small, leather-bound address book tucked away in a drawer beneath a pile of old blueprints. Most of the entries were old, faded. But towards the back, in a different ink, was a name and number. Eleanor Vance, estate planning, and a date, relatively recent, only a few months before Dad's death. Mark had never mentioned this name. He claimed Dad had worked with their longtime family attorney, the one now officiating the will reading, Mr. Abernathy, to finalize everything. Why would Dad consult a different estate lawyer? A new wave of determination washed over me, cold and clear. Mark thought he had covered his tracks. He thought he knew everything, but he didn't know about Eleanor Vance. Contacting Eleanor Vance was a gamble. I found her office number online, cold called her, explaining who I was and why I was calling. She was initially cautious, bound by client confidentiality. But when I mentioned my father's name and the approximate date in the address book, her tone softened slightly. She remembered him. A quiet, thoughtful man, she said. She couldn't disclose details over the phone, of course, but she agreed to meet with me. That meeting changed everything. Eleanor Vance was sharp, professional, and discreet. She confirmed that my father had consulted her. He was concerned, she explained, about the future of his company and his estate. He was also concerned, she chose her words carefully, about certain pressures he was facing regarding his existing will. He had, she confirmed, drafted a new will with her. This will addressed his true wishes for the business and his assets. It was signed and witnessed. And critically, it revoked all previous wills. She held up a document, crisp and official. Your father instructed me, she said, her voice low, to keep this in a secure location and to present it only at the formal reading of his will, with all immediate family present. He specifically worried, she paused, looking directly at me, that it might otherwise disappear. The pieces clicked into place. Mark hadn't just manipulated Dad, he'd likely threatened or pressured him, convincing him the existing will was final, making him believe he'd succeeded in cutting me out, while Dad was secretly making completely different arrangements. Dad hadn't been fooled. He'd been playing a deeper game, a final, protective maneuver. He knew Mark would try to intercept anything left with the family attorney. So he'd gone outside the circle, to someone new, someone Mark didn't know about. It was Dad's quiet resistance, his final act of foresight. Sitting here now, in Mr. Abernathy's office, I feel a strange calm. The dread is still there, a dull ache, but it's overlaid with something else. Confidence. Not the performative confidence of my brother, but a quiet, internal knowing. I watch Mark across the table, radiating his usual smugness. He catches my eye and offers a condescending smile, a silent reminder of our last conversation at the wake. He thinks he's won. He thinks this is just a formality before he takes complete control. He has no idea. Mr. Abernathy clears his throat again, shuffling the papers before him. He begins reading, his voice dry and formal, outlining the initial clauses, the standard legal language. Mark leans back in his chair, relaxed, already the king surveying his new kingdom. Mr. Abernathy details the assets, the property, the business. He refers to the will he holds as the last will and testament of father's name, dated date. Mark probably showed me, this is it. The document Mark believes confirms his victory. Mark's smirk deepens. He glances at me, a look of triumph blazing in his eyes. He's waiting for me to flinch, to show despair. But I meet his gaze steadily. Mr. Abernathy continues, drones on about executors and beneficiaries. Mark is named as the primary beneficiary, the one inheriting the majority of the estate, the business. A wave of nausea washes over me, despite knowing what's coming. It's still hard to hear it, to hear his calculated lies given the weight of legal language. Mr. Abernathy pauses, takes a sip of water. Mark shifts in his seat, impatient for the reading to be over, eager for the final confirmation of his dominance. He looks at me again, that smirk wide now, almost a grin. He opens his mouth, perhaps to say something cutting, something final. But Mr. Abernathy clears his throat one last time, a different sound this time, sharper. He sets down the document he was reading from. He looks around the room, his gaze resting briefly on Mark, then on me. Before we conclude the reading of this document, he says, his voice gaining a new, firm cadence, there is a matter of a subsequent will. Mark freezes. The smirk vanishes instantly. His eyes widen, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Subsequent, he asks, his voice tight. Mr. Abernathy nods.
Yes.
It has come to my attention that Mr. Father's name executed a later will. He reaches into his briefcase and pulls out a second document, identical in appearance to the first, but clearly distinct. He holds it up. This is the last will and testament of Father's name, dated date from Eleanor Vance's office. He places it on the table. This will was properly executed and witnessed. And crucially, it contains a standard clause expressly revoking all prior wills and codicils. The air is sucked out of the room. Silence, deeper and more absolute than before, descends. All eyes are on Mr. Abernathy. Mark is staring at the second document, his face draining of color. Disbelief wars with dawning horror. His wife gasps softly beside him. Mr. Abernathy continues, his voice calm and measured. As the most recent valid will, this document dictates the distribution of Mr. Father's name. As estate, he picks up the second will. He looks at Mark, then his gaze settles on me. And then, with deliberate slowness, he extends the document across the table. He hands it directly to me. This, he says, his voice quiet but carrying through the silent room, is your father's final will. I take the document, my fingers brushing his. It feels solid, real. Not a ghost of my father's true wishes, but the tangible proof. I don't look at Mark. I don't need to. I can feel his gaze on me, burning with disbelief, rage, and shock. The room feels like a pressure cooker about to explode. Mr. Abernathy begins to read from the new will. The language is different. It speaks of stewardship, of honoring legacy, of recognizing dedication. It places the business, the heart of Dad's life, into a trust, naming me not just as a beneficiary, but as the trustee, the one responsible for running and preserving it. It provides for Mark, yes, but in a way that reflects his history of financial irresponsibility, a limited, managed fund, nothing he can squander overnight, nothing close to the outright control he'd craved. It clearly, unequivocally, entrusts the future of everything my father built to me. Mark's voice shatters the silence. This is a fraud, he shouts, his face contorted with fury. He slams his hand on the table. This is impossible. Dad would never. He told me everything was mine. Mr. Abernathy remains unruffled. The document is valid, Mr. Mark. It was executed in the presence of independent witnesses and counsel. Your father's intentions are clearly stated. He gestures towards me, holding the will. As the trustee and primary beneficiary of the business, the responsibility for its management and future direction now rests with you. I finally look at Mark. His eyes are wild, panicked. The smugness is completely gone, replaced by naked, blindsided fury. He looks lost, like a child whose favorite toy has been snatched away. He had been so certain, so utterly convinced of his own cleverness, his own entitlement. He had been so busy celebrating his perceived victory, so focused on keeping me out, that he had completely missed the fact that Dad was one step ahead. Dad, the quiet, thoughtful man Mark thought he could manipulate, had seen his brother clearly and had prepared for this moment. He hadn't told Mark about the new will because he knew exactly what Mark would do. He had trusted me, quietly, in a way Mark had never understood. The silence stretches, broken only by Mark's heavy, ragged breathing. He looks from the will in my hands to Mr. Abernathy, then back to me, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. He had been outmaneuvered. Not by me directly, but by the quiet strength and foresight of the father he thought he had fooled, the father whose trust he had betrayed. And in the process, he had walked right into the trap Dad set, believing his own lies until the very end. The aftermath in that room was a maelstrom. Mark erupted, a torrent of accusations and denials. His wife tried to calm him, her face pale with shock. Other family members shifted uncomfortably, some looking at Mark with disapproval, others glancing at me with newfound respect, or perhaps just surprise. Mr. Abernathy calmly explained the legal ramifications, the clear instructions in the final will. Mark's carefully constructed world, built on deception and greed, collapsed around him. He stormed out, his face a picture of utter defeat, leaving behind only the echoes of his rage. I stayed, talking quietly with Mr. Abernathy, feeling the weight of the documents in my hands. It wasn't a feeling of pure victory. It was heavier, more complex. There was relief. Yes, a deep, shuddering relief that justice, in its own quiet way, had been served. But there was also profound sadness. Sadness for the brokenness of my family, for the lengths my brother had gone to, for the pain he had caused, and for the father who had to plan for his own death while navigating his son's manipulative nature. Dad's foresight, his secret strength, was a final gift, a shield against the storm Mark had intended to unleash upon my life. He had trusted me with his legacy, with the business, with the quiet understanding that I valued it not just for profit, but for what it represented: hard work, stability, a place for people. Walking out of that office building, the rain had stopped. The air was clean, washed fresh. The city felt different. The weight on my shoulders was still there, the responsibility of the business, the complex emotions about my family. But it was no longer the crushing weight of powerlessness. It was the weight of purpose, of trust, of a legacy to protect. Mark's smirk, his casual cruelty, had underestimated everything. My father's wisdom, my quiet resilience, and the fact that sometimes the people who seem the most passive are the ones capable of the deepest determination, the ones who see the truth when others are blinded by greed. I hadn't fought him with shouting or aggression. I had found the truth, armed myself with it, and let it speak for itself. And in the end, that quiet truth was louder and far more powerful than all of Mark's bluster and lies combined. My father's final act wasn't about choosing a favorite, it was about choosing a steward. And in that quiet, deliberate choice, he had given me back not just my inheritance, but my voice, my dignity, and the strength to carry his legacy forward. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.